The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the old wooden floor. The air felt heavier than usual, the silence almost deliberate, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. James had stumbled in hours ago, reeking of whiskey and laughter that didn't quite reach his eyes, collapsing onto the couch in the same suit he'd left in. He hadn't noticed the untouched dinner, or the way I'd looked at him as he passed. Maybe I hadn't expected him to. I sat alone at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of a chipped mug with my finger. The tea had gone cold. My phone buzzed once, an alert I didn't care to check. The night was stretching thin, and sleep felt like a distant invitation I couldn't quite accept. Something inside me ached, and not from loneliness exactly, but from a deep sense of being unseen, the kind of invisibility that creeps in slowly over time, until even your reflection seems to look past you. The sound of soft footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. I turned, startled, as Ethan appeared at the edge of the hallway, his frame backlit by the glow of the living room. He wore a plain black t-shirt and gray sweats, his dark curls slightly damp from a shower. His presence was unexpected, yet strangely calming. You're still up? He asked, voice low, as if not to wake the silence. Couldn't sleep, I replied, offering a faint smile. He shrugged. He was loud coming in. Thought I'd check if everything was all right. He didn't need to say who he was. We both glanced briefly toward the living room, where James snored unevenly, sprawled over the cushions like a man at peace with his demons. Ethan moved toward the counter and filled the kettle. Want a fresh cup? He asked. I hesitated before, nodding, sure, thanks. We settled into the quiet like old friends who'd never quite had the chance. Ethan poured the tea and took the seat across from me, elbows resting gently on the table's edge. There was a softness to him, steady, observant, and untouched by the sharpness that had taken root in James over the years. I remembered when James used to laugh easily, love effortlessly. That man had disappeared somewhere between promotions and parties, replaced by someone who drank more than he spoke and only touched me in passing. You look tired, Ethan said, his gaze careful, but sincere. I feel it, I admitted. It's been a long week. He nodded slowly, taking a sip. He's been drinking a lot lately. I didn't respond immediately. There was something fragile in the way he said it. Not accusatory, just honest. I didn't want to make him choose between loyalty to his father and understanding me. Still, the truth pressed forward. It's been getting worse, I said quietly. I think he forgets I'm still here. Ethan looked at me then, really looked, his eyes steady and impossibly kind. You shouldn't have to feel that way. I felt my throat tighten. No one had said anything like that in a long time. Not with such conviction. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, like he believed I deserved better, and wasn't afraid to say so. The kettle clicked off, steam rising lazily into the air. I refilled my mug, savoring the warmth in my hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. Something unsaid but understood. How's school? I asked, partly to shift the subject, partly to remind myself that Ethan was still young, still figuring things out. All right, he said. Being back here's been strange. Strange, how? He hesitated. This house feels different, like something's missing. I studied him carefully. What do you think it is? He looked down at his cup, thoughtful, maybe honesty, or maybe just peace. I swallowed hard. The truth of it stung because it was real. We'd all been pretending in our own ways. James with his drinking, me with my silence, Ethan with his politeness. We were a house of people trying not to say the things that needed saying. Sorry, he said quickly. That sounded harsh. No, I said. It sounded true. The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing tree branches against the window. Inside, something shifted, subtle, invisible, but there. I looked at Ethan and wondered how someone so young could see so much, while the man I married seemed to see nothing at all. We stayed there a while longer, sipping tea in the soft light. Nothing else was said that needed to be. Yet something unspoken passed between us, like the first page of a story neither of us had meant to write. And as I finally stood to put my cup in the sink, I knew this night had quietly begun something I wouldn't be able to undo. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed loosely, watching me with a quiet intensity that made it hard to hold his gaze for long. The tea between us had cooled again, forgotten in the growing stillness. I wasn't sure how we'd landed here, just the two of us, sharing the kind of silence that feels like a conversation in itself. It's strange, he said, his voice low but clear. I remember visiting when I was younger. Everything felt warmer back then. I nodded, eyes on the flickering shadows across the kitchen wall. It was warmer, Or maybe we were just better at pretending. Asterisk, he didn't argue. His fingers tapped absently against the mug, as though searching for something to say that wouldn't break the fragile atmosphere between us. Eventually, he spoke again, gently. Asterisk, do you still love him? Asterisk, the question landed like a stone in the middle of my chest. I opened my mouth, closed it, and finally let out a quiet breath. I don't know. Asterisk, that was the truth. I had loved James fiercely, fully, once, but now the feeling was a memory worn thin, the echo of a song I used to hum without thinking. The love I had for him was buried somewhere under the nights he didn't come home sober, and the mornings he forgot what he'd said. Asterisk, I think, I continued slowly, I miss who he used to be more than I love who he is now. Asterisk, Ethan didn't speak right away. Instead, he stood and walked over to the counter, his movements unhurried. He poured water into a fresh mug and slid it in front of me without a word, his quiet attentiveness cutting deeper than any grand gesture. Asterisk, he used to talk about you all the time, Ethan said softly. Back when you first met, said you made him feel grounded, but you were different from anyone he'd ever known. Asterisk, I smiled faintly, though the expression didn't quite reach my eyes. People changed. Or maybe they stopped trying, Ethan said. He sat down again. This time, a little closer, I could feel his presence more acutely, the warmth of his skin, the soft scent of whatever soap he used, the calmness in his posture. It unsettled me, the way his nearness made the room feel both safer and more dangerous at once. Asterisk, I never saw you as a step-parent, he said suddenly. Asterisk, I blinked. No. Asterisk, he shook his head. Not in a bad way, just you always treated me like an equal, like you saw me, not just as James's kid. Asterisk, I didn't know how to respond to that, but I felt the truth of it settle between us. I had tried to be present, even when James wasn't. And maybe, without realizing it, I had been searching for connection wherever I could still find it. Asterisk, you're different from him, I said. Asterisk, Ethan tilted his head, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I've been told. Asterisk, it's a good thing, I added quickly, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. You listen, you ask questions. He hasn't asked me how I feel in years. Asterisk, then maybe you need someone who does. Asterisk, the words came quietly, but they landed with weight. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not just James's son, but a man who understood more than he should have to. There was no mocking, no flirtation, something honest and raw and deeply, painfully kind. Asterisk, the moment stretched. My pulse thrummed louder in my ears. I looked away, afraid of what I might say next. Asterisk, outside, the wind pressed harder against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the house settled with a soft groan. Time was slipping by unnoticed, the night growing heavier around us. Asterisk, I should sleep, I said finally, though I didn't move. Asterisk, yeah, Ethan murmured, me too. Asterisk, but neither of us stood. Instead, we sat there in that small pool of kitchen light, staring at nothing in particular, both of us aware that something had shifted. The boundary we hadn't named was now uncomfortably visible, drawn, not by our actions, but by the things we were starting to feel. Asterisk, I glanced toward the hallway. James was still asleep, oblivious, distant even in dreams. I wondered what he would say if he saw us like this, not doing anything wrong, not touching, but undeniably close. Asterisk, Ethan stood first, slowly, and placed his mug in the sink. As he turned to go, he paused at the doorway. Asterisk, I'll see you in the morning, he said. Yeah, I whispered, not trusting myself to say more. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving the kitchen colder without him. I remained at the table, heart unsteady, wondering how something so quiet could be so loud. Asterisk. Morning brought no clarity, only a dim wash of pale light spilling through the half-drawn curtains. The house felt hollow in the early hours, as if it were still processing the night that had come before. James was gone by the time I entered the kitchen, his absence marked by an untouched coffee mug and the lingering scent of his cologne. No note, no text, just silence, and the sound of my own heart straining to return to normal. Asterisk, I moved through the motions of the day, washing dishes, folding laundry, wiping counters already clean, but nothing felt right. The rhythm was off. I kept catching myself, glancing toward the hallway, listening for footsteps that never came. Ethan stayed in his room, or maybe he was avoiding me. Either way, the house felt suspended between what had almost happened and what absolutely could not. Asterisk, around noon. I stood at the sink, staring out the window, fingers clenched around a sponge I hadn't used in minutes. I wasn't sure what disturbed me more, that Ethan had looked at me with something like concern, or that I had wanted him to. Asterisk, he saw me. That was the most dangerous part, not just in a polite, passing way, but as someone who had quietly studied my silences, my hesitations, the way I held my mug with both hands when my fingers trembled, and I had let him see. Worse, I had welcomed it. Asterisk, the front door creaked open, and I heard footsteps, heavy, quick, followed by the clatter of keys on the entryway table. James appeared a moment later, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. He looked tired, though not from work. Asterisk, you didn't call, he said flatly. Asterisk, I didn't know I was supposed to, I replied without turning. Asterisk, his sigh was sharp, laced with irritation. You always wait up, I figured you'd be worried. Asterisk, I turned slowly, drying my hands with a towel. I did wait, then I stopped. Asterisk, James frowned, as if confused by the idea of my patience having a limit. Don't be dramatic. Asterisk, I'm not. My voice was calm, even, just tired. Asterisk, he didn't press. Instead, he walked past me, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge and downing it in large gulps. He avoided eye contact. I didn't push him to make it. Asterisk, later that evening, Ethan emerged, eyes shadowed, hair still tousled from sleep or stress. He lingered in the kitchen doorway like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Hey, I said gently. Hey. Asterisk, he stepped in slowly, avoiding the spot at the table where we'd sat the night before. He poured himself a glass of juice and leaned against the counter, the distance between us more pronounced now. Asterisk, did you sleep okay? I asked, trying to sound casual. Asterisk, he hesitated. Eventually, asterisk, I nodded, unsure how to bridge the space that had opened between us. James was upstairs, taking a shower, the sound of the water faintly echoing through the ceiling. Asterisk, you and my dad talk? Ethan asked, his tone unreadable. Asterisk, for a moment, I said. He didn't say much. Asterisk, Ethan studied me, his eyes too perceptive. He never does. Asterisk, a long silence followed. The clock ticked and refrigerator hummed. It felt like we were both standing on opposite sides of something invisible, something we hadn't dared name. Asterisk, I think I should go back to campus tomorrow, Ethan said. Asterisk, the words struck deeper than I expected. You just got here? Asterisk, yeah, he murmured, but it's complicated being here. Asterisk, I wanted to ask what he meant exactly, but I already knew. The house, the history, the tension between presence and absence, it was all too much. It needed space, and maybe I did too. I understand, I said quietly. He looked relieved, but also a little sad. I didn't want things to get weird. They haven't, I lied. We stood there for a while longer, drinking from our separate glasses, avoiding the weight of what we couldn't say aloud. When Ethan finally left the room, I didn't stop him. I couldn't. The fragile balance between what we'd shared and what we couldn't allow had been tipped too far to return to comfort. Asterisk, that night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. James lay beside me, his back turned, his breathing steady. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed in the way I used to. I just felt empty, as if something vital had slipped through my fingers. Asterisk, in the darkness, I thought about the way Ethan had looked at me, not with desire, not exactly, but with something far more dangerous, understanding. I thought about the long hours in the kitchen, the way the silence between us had felt more honest than any conversation I'd had in years. Asterisk, and I wondered if it was possible to miss someone who hadn't even left yet. Asterisk, the day Ethan left, the house returned to a kind of quiet that no longer felt comforting. He packed early, methodically, never once asking for help. I stood in the hallway pretending to check the linen closet, listening to the sounds of zippers and shifting fabric, each one a marker of his growing distance. Asterisk, James had already left for work without a word. There was no goodbye, no shared coffee, no lingering glance back. His absence had become a routine I no longer resented, just one I endured. Asterisk, Ethan appeared at the foot of the stairs, with his bag slung over one shoulder. He looked older than he had days ago, or maybe I was only seeing him more clearly now. Less as my husband's son, and more as a man who had quietly borne his own disappointments. Asterisk, I can drive you to the station, I offered, trying not to sound too eager. Asterisk, he shook his head. I called a car. Should be here in 10. Asterisk, I nodded, heart sinking. I wanted to ask him to stay. I wanted to ask what we'd meant to each other in those quiet hours, whether I had imagined the weight of his gaze or the way he seemed to listen with his whole body. But I didn't. I couldn't. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. Asterisk, we sat by the window, in silence, watching the wind play with the leaves outside. The moment felt borrowed, like the last few seconds of a dream you didn't want to wake from. Asterisk, when I was a kid, Ethan said finally. I used to think if I could just be good enough, maybe he'd notice. Asterisk, my throat tightened. He sees what he wants to see. Asterisk, Ethan smiled sadly. Yeah, guess I stopped trying to be seen. Asterisk, I reached for his hand without thinking, letting my fingers rest over his, just long enough for him to know I understood. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold on either. The air between us pulsed with everything unspoken. Asterisk, I don't know what last night was, he said softly, his eyes not meeting mine, but it mattered to me. It mattered to me too, I whispered. The car pulled into the driveway. He stood, slung his bag higher on his shoulder, and looked at me like he wanted to remember my face for longer than this moment would allow. Asterisk, take care of yourself, he said, voice tight. Asterisk, you too. Asterisk, and then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a finality I felt in my bones. I stood there long after the car disappeared down the street, the air around me too still, like the house itself had exhaled and gone silent. Asterisk, days passed, and James returned to his usual rhythms: late nights, empty conversations, the faint smell of alcohol tracing his steps. I watched him from across the room sometimes, trying to remember what had once drawn me in. He never asked about Ethan, never mentioned the way I'd seemed different. I wondered if he even noticed. Asterisk, I found Ethan's mug one evening, still tucked in the back of the cupboard. I held it in both hands and sat at the kitchen table, letting memory press in from all sides. That night, those quiet hours, the careful space we'd shared, it haunted me not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. Asterisk, and yet, something in me had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore for James to see me, for affection that felt like an afterthought, for the kind of love that left me asking for less. I had tasted something real, even if only briefly, and I couldn't go back to pretending that emptiness was enough. Asterisk, one morning, I woke early. The light was soft, pouring through the windows like hope made visible. I made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat at the table, no longer avoiding the quiet but meeting it, eyes open, heart steady. Asterisk, I didn't know what came next. Maybe nothing would come of it. Maybe Ethan would drift into his own life, and I into mine. Our moment, a single note in an unfinished song, but I would carry it. I would carry that night like a secret flame, quiet and sure, reminding me that I was still capable of feeling something true. Asterisk, the sound of birdsong drifted in through the open window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel numb. I felt awake, and maybe that was the beginning of something.